He is the host of B-Ball Breakdown on YouTube. We welcome back Coach Nick onto Hoopsology. Welcome, Coach Nick.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming back on the show. Really happy to have you, and it's appropriate timing. Just the first half of the season is winding down, so lots of topics just to discuss with you. So let's not waste any time. I watched the most recent video about the New Orleans Pelicans and Zion, and that's one of the teams that I think Matt and I have our eyes on for multiple reasons. And I think what really stood out to me is the Pelicans finally realizing their potential and Zion, keeping on the streak of remaining healthy. Can you just explain kind of what is the result of this kind of change? Because I think in previous years, I think the Pelicans have been somewhat of a disappointment, but yet, even though their seeding might not, jump out to just your average NBA fan, according to you, it seems like they have a lot of momentum to make a little bit of a deep playoff run.
Oh, absolutely. They're definitely being slept on in a weird way because Zion is one of the most exciting players in the league, and he has been healthy. A little bit unclear to me why compared to other years. You know what I mean? In terms of I don't think he's thinner than he has been in the past or whatever. It's just, or maybe it's just the luck of the draw. And it's not even injured. Knock on some wood. Willie Green has come out of the mold from being an assistant to Steve Kerr for very briefly, and then his other passes really put together a great game plan that makes them just really difficult on both ends of the floor. And that's what's unique about them is they have a lot of length defensively to cause problems and havoc. And then they have some unstoppable forces on the offensive end, too, with a lot of spacing, a lot of movement. So they're going to be that team that nobody wants to play in the playoffs.
So with Zion in particular, a lot of scrutiny on him just regarding his weight. And again, you can't really put your finger on it. If he stays healthy for the remainder of the season, if the Pelicans, move up in seeding or they even advance late in the playoffs, what kind of effect do you think this will have on his game? Because I think this season, correct me if I'm wrong, would be kind of the first season where it's actually positive in terms of just kind of people evaluating him just in terms of like different metrics. So, if things continue to go well, do you think this will play into future seasons for him?
I would think so. I mean, I think it's a lot of times it's unfair when you get injured. It's just something you can't really control necessarily. But for him, because you can point to perhaps the excess weight is causing those injuries and that he could control that in theory, then that's a negative on him and whatever. It would be nice to get into a mode where we just admire the guy as an unstoppable player anywhere near the basket. His points per game average is actually a lot lower than we'd seen it in the past. And it's not necessarily because of the field goal percentage. I suppose that the team is better around him, right? So he doesn't have to do as much. But that said, I would anticipate at some point that going back up as well, like maybe finding more of a playoff rotation where he goes, maybe a little bit more than the 30.5 minutes per game he's playing, and then you'll see the points go up again. He should be cemented as a perennial all-star and a guy that will shoot an incredibly high percentage of field goals and be a guy who, just is a handful. And in the playoffs, that's a real value.
Coach, beyond the health of Zion and, kind of good circumstances, what else are you seeing from the Pelicans that make them maybe more of a threat this year and previous years? Is it continuity, more time together just on this team's timeline as a unit, or more beyond that?
I think it's a good question. I think it's all those things. I think it's sort of the continuity. They had gotten C.J. McCollum in midseason, and now he's been there and has a lot of good base. Willie Green, is another year of experience as a head coach that he didn't have before. That's important. I'm trying to think. They have a young team. Herb Jones is just a guy who, you don't want to have to play against if you have the ball in your hands. He's a really tough defender, and just, again, young. Trey Murphy is another guy who comes in here as a youngster and finding a nice role. I think it just takes time sometimes, and it's nice to see the team. They've been able to keep together the core for a couple seasons in a row. So I'm not surprised at all. This would, when you look at it on paper, they have a great mix of a lot of great athletes in length and defensive focus. They have a great mix with offense as well. And so it felt like it could have just been a matter of time, right, until they could stay healthy enough, although Brandon Ingram, I think, is now the next person who's not staying healthy for us. But if they can figure that all out and get into the playoffs ready to go, then again, I don't know. I mean, the question that when I keep saying is, no one wants to play them, but what does that mean for their fortunes? How far do they get? What about you guys? How far do you feel like they can get in the playoffs?
It's a good question. I would want to see who they're matched up against because I'm not sure how certain matchups would handle Zion and be able to control that. Like I think back from a couple years ago, being matched up against the Suns again, that was a very fiery first round matchup between those two teams. And with the new look Suns, I'd be curious to see if they could slow down Zion. Do you see any particular advantages that Zion has against maybe higher seeded opponents potentially in the West?
Ooh, that's a good question. Let's see, who above them would not be able to handle him, I guess is the question, right? Like, who
Right.
they, if you put like KD on him, I would actually like to go through the footage and see how that's gone in the past, because I know that KD does not like physicality at all, right?
Mm.
And if Zion gets his shoulder into his chest, like that would be over for KD, I would imagine. And who else do they have? They have Nurkic, who isn't a good enough defender, I don't think, to handle that. So I think the Suns would have a problem with him. The fun thing about the Suns is you get to have like Brandon Ingram against KD because they're sort of similar, right? That would be fun to watch them go at it. Denver, Aaron Gordon, by the way, against Zion would be great. And I think that Denver, he has enough to offer strength-wise and mobility-wise that he could make a problem for Zion for sure. I'm keep going up the ladder right now, and the Clippers are in third. They have Paul George, they have Kawhi Leonard at those forward spots, and where they, that Zubats would have to deal with Valanciunas. So that's interesting. I think they could kind of cobble it together a little bit. Those two guys are really great defenders, PG and Kawhi. They don't have the strength really. But they could probably figure something out, I think, to kind of contain him a little bit. And then OKC, by committee, they probably could, do some stuff. I don't know, like who would have to be like Jalen Williams.
They're probably struggling a little bit more with size, like Phoenix, to an extent.
If Chet comes over, have to pick him up. Like he'd get bullied under the basket, but Chet is always great at like recovering off of those, so he'd still be able to get a hand up, maybe. Although he might be getting hand up as he's getting dunked on, so that might not work so well for him. And then I don't think Karl Anthony Towns could deal with him very well. So so there are there's a handful of teams that are above them that would have a problem keeping him from shooting 60% from the field and getting his 20-some points.
You mentioned the Clippers, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on them because I will confess to you, initially, I was one of the naysayers on this trade, acquiring James Harden, and they really have clicked, and credit to them for being mature enough to figure out how to distribute the ball, for Westbrook going to the bench and figuring this all out. But there's a big difference from figuring that out in the regular season to being a legitimate problem in the playoffs. Where do you see them as far as like a threat to advance in the playoffs a few rounds?
I was kind of sold when they were putting this thing together, and it just must have been brutal if you were a Clippers fan to not have PG and Kawhi healthy for the first, I think, 2.5 to 3 years. And they've decided to be healthy. They are healthy. However, that's working out for them. I was at the game against the Pelicans and got to see them up close. And then they just beat the Warriors, who were on a roll. So you have a nice balance and perfect mix of everything you would need, right? You have in the modern game, you have the two elite defenders at that position. While they know how to pace themselves in the regular season, but when it gets to the playoffs, Kawhi Leonard and PG are going to be elite defenders, and they're going to be able to play whoever they need to play, whatever size, to be able to handle that. Zubats, I really like. He's got a nice little game around the basket. He knows how to move his body. He can hopefully stay out of foul trouble against the good teams and give them minutes. And then all the other role players fit together really nicely. Harden, not a role player, as well, has been able to really sort of get back to his OKC roots. Right. And so, again, like that's the thing that nobody's going to want to play them either. The Warriors had them. They had them down like 14, 15 points at the end of the third quarter. It was over. The Clippers look listless and not interested, and then they just turn it on and become unstoppable. Norman Powell is hitting, pump fake 3-pointers over and over again in the fourth, but primarily because Harden, PG, and Kawhi absorb so much gravity that those guys get easy shots up the wazoo. So I have a feeling what's going to hold them back would probably be a guy like Norman Powell. If he doesn't, he's the X factor to some degree. I don't even know what Terrence Mann is anymore. He doesn't seem as impactful this year as he had been in the past. So a guy like Norman Powell and then a guy like Russ, are going to be the two guys that are going to probably end up deciding a number of those games. And that would be that's their fate. I think that Ty Lue is sort of has accepted that because the West is so good. You can't show up with Kawhi, PG, and Harden and just assume, you're going to win a series anymore. But that's where those guys are going to come into play. So Russ will have to play well, and he has been doing nicely. I've been a guy who's been a critic of his for a long time, but he has been able to find a niche primarily because they limit his minutes to about 20. Right. So they're sculpting away the things that would drive me nuts or a coach nuts because of the minutes restriction, basically. And you're getting more and more like the good Russ. So it's a long winded answer to your question, but I'm not even sure. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. No,
okay.
I think we're seeing, like, you mentioned, I think a good amount of versatility that they might have to be able to throw at opponents in the playoffs. And maybe it's more top heavy, which was kind of my initial concern, is lack of trust for the team, just given the unfortunate history in the past couple of years. But you do cut rotations down in the playoffs, as you know better than me, and maybe that serves them very well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So you'll see a lot of those guys. I mean, Russ is actually up to 23 minutes a game. It was a little bit lower than that for a while when he went to the bench, which I thought was the right move. Like, he needed to go to the bench because of his lack of gravity was getting in the way of everybody else. So, so they're going to end up cutting those minutes. All the other minutes are going to go up. You'll see James Harden play 37 minutes in a game, probably 38, and then it's the same with the other guys. So it's less important in theory, right, to deal with how deep you are. But again, Russ has a lot of experience in the playoffs, deep in the playoffs, so he knows how to deal with that too. That's important. Now, is PJ Tucker and Bones Highland going to continue causing problems? I don't know. They probably will make sure they're not with them if that's the case. But, PJ Tucker's a guy who, in a pinch could help you shift the playoff game, you know? You got to keep him a little bit fresh. I think he's probably gotten DNPs, which is why he's so upset. I remember, when I was at the game seeing him, I'm like, oh yeah, you forget about PJ Tucker. And he's a guy who was very recently starting on, a playoff team that went deep, so I get it on his point of view, why he'd be so upset, but you can't be causing distractions like him and Bones were doing.
I want to shift to the Eastern Conference and another video put out, and that is the New York Knicks and Jalen Brunson. They're sitting at fourth in the Eastern Conference as a recording of this podcast. Where do you see the Knicks? I think they always gain a lot of media attention. Do you think they are for real with Thibodeau? Like, how much of a threat do you really see them against kind of the top tier, just with Embiid with his injury troubles? Do you really think they can kind of make a run at the top of the conference, or do you think they're maybe a couple of years away? Like, how do you see this ascension of the Knicks so far?
Well, I think the moves they made just now this is win now. They want to take advantage of Philadelphia, who is really reeling without Embiid, which makes sense. And there's an opening there. Are the Celtics for real? I don't know. They've been hammering everybody, and they have a really good roster if they're healthy. But adding Bojan Bogdanovic was big. Adding Burks is helpful. Although again, all those minutes are going to be juggled. We have to see everybody healthy together. We haven't seen them with OG and with Randall yet. But they have everything on paper. And before those moves were made, before Bogdanovic shows up, they were really onto something. And I think that, having Jalen Brunson as the lead attack is something that is sustainable. I know there was talk about, you can't have a guy that size be your best player, but I don't know. I mean, Steph Curry did it, has won a few titles doing that way. So, I think that Brunson should be in the MVP conversation. I feel like he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders with these guys. And when Randall comes back, that'll help. But you got, a lot of great ingredients here for a very tough team. The only question I have maybe Tibbs' communication style. Does that possibly hold them back? I'm kind of big on that as far as the coaching. In the modern era, you need to be able to have players in a flow state as much as possible, because they have to be able to hit threes, right? And if you want, let's say you're a 4th seed and you want to make a deeper run and play over your heads, generally in the modern game, it's because you're going to start getting hot from the 3-point line, right? Like that's like the conventional wisdom, the unconventional conventional wisdom. And so knowing what it takes and how the brain reacts in the face of anger and disgust and all those negative communication traits that coaches sometimes use, like Tibbs, you might put a ceiling on how well you're going to shoot, and are you going to get hot or not? And I worry about that. It might just be all new age hogwash and doesn't really apply, but in my experience, I feel like it does when you're talking about shooting the ball from 26 feet away, which is far. And so that's the big question for me. Is the only way they're going to be able to beat someone better than them, and maybe who has a home court advantage over them, would be to get hot. That's why Bogdanovich is so big, because they keep playing Brunson in these lineups that have 3 non-shooters. There's no room for him. As a result, he can't get all the way to the basket, so he turns those drives that get cut off into the best post-ups we're going to see in the NBA, bar none. The best post-up player in the NBA is Jalen Brunson. He doesn't do it the way Embiid and Jokic do it. He does it off of a drive and then becomes a post-up, which I think is awesome, and every guard should be doing this. But anyway, long answer to your question is they have all the ingredients, and it's a question now. I need more data. I need to see all these guys healthy, 10 games, figure out how Tibbs going to get them to play the offense together. And by the way, despite having no spacing for Brunson, they're still an elite offensive team. And I'm not even sure I understand that. I think there's the notion of offensive rebounds and putbacks, but that worries me a little bit, because they need better spacing, and they've made the appropriate moves to find it.
Nick, I want to go back to what you mentioned with communication style and Tibbs there, because I find that really fascinating. Do you think that his communication style is integral to the defensive identity on that team? Like, if his style were to change, if he could change that, would it harm the defensive side of that team? And can you just unpack that a little bit more for us? Like, is it specifically angry reactions to things, or things that stop the action that he does? What do you mean
Sure.
by the communication style?
Well, it's a two-parter, because when you talk about Julius Randle, one of the things that's confounding about him is that he's kind of like Jekyll and Hyde, right? And it might even be a personality thing where he just comes in hot, he comes in cold, and you never know. What I've noticed, and I've asked some people who are following the Knicks even closer than I do, what I've noticed is that it seems like the Villanova guys might have recognized this and have taken upon themselves in a very thoughtful manner to keep him in as positive a frame of mind as they can, joking around with him, always trying to keep it light with him, because if he does get into those funks, he just starts to play bad and play very poorly, and doesn't do all the good stuff, which we see, which is when he's into it and he's positive, he is not only, you can't stop him down low, but then he's making great passes when he draws the double teams. He's just, he's just more integral to that. Now, on top of that, if you have a coach who's is grinds and rarely smiles, rarely uses any kind of positive reinforcement, even when they force the other team to call a timeout, when the Knicks go on a run and they come in the huddle, it's just the body language is down, and it's very much, he'll think it's serious and it's intense and it's all the things he wants. And I know this because I grew up and we're almost the same age. It's like, I know what the thought process behind that is. But if you want to be able to build upon great play, I think it helps to get your players in a more positive frame of mind. He could say, well, we're going to bring players in that are tough and they don't need that, and yada, yada. But I tell you, it helps no matter what. And the players that say to me that I've heard say, I need that kind of coaching to play hard, is soul killing, A, and then B, it only tells me that they've never had a coach that used emotional intelligence to properly coach in the modern game. Now, that said, I have detected Thibodeau laughing. I've seen footage this year of him in the middle of a game, not smiling, laughing. This is something we've never seen before. I think that was on a Knicks podcast just before this. They were saying that's because they're winning, so he can be a little bit more happy. But I would argue, if you're a little bit more happy, then you'll get more winning. I think that's the order. He probably goes backwards on that one. But whatever it takes, if we can channel more of that tips, I think that it'll unlock more for the team itself.
And follow up to your comments about Jalen Brunson, just subjectively from what you're seeing out there, why isn't he talked about more in the MVP discussion?
It's always the short guys like that who get forgotten. At least he's getting all these opportunities. He's leading a team because, the Mavericks probably didn't value that as much as they should have. I did a video where I was able to show that he was as important as Luka was when they were playing together in that playoff run. Like he was setting up Luka as much as Luka was setting him up, and he was causing as much trouble on the defense as Luka was. But guys that size always get forgotten or pushed aside. They assume that they're not going to be as good as they are, and it's been that way forever. Now in New York, you would think that this is now the media capital and they're going to be able to make a big push. I guess it's the Knicks' shortcomings. They need to be pushing it more. I did the video on him about a week and a half ago, and I thought I kind of made it clear, and usually I can nudge that conversation a little bit into that direction, but we need to have that. If they're fourth or they're third in the Eastern Conference, he's doing most of the work on this. He needs to be in that conversation, and I feel like the Knicks people told me there's a rankings of MVP right now. He's not in the top 10.
Wow.
Like Sabonis is above him. That's ridiculous. And that needs to change. So I'll take some of that burden. It's my fault. I got to make sure on Twitter or whatever I'm making that point. But we need more MVP chance, I suppose, at the Garden too.
So, Coach, I want to get your take on this. There's been a lot of conjecture just on Twitter, post-game press conferences about the fundamentals missing from the game of basketball, both on the collegiate level, on the pro level, by coaches, by some players, just in terms of a lot of players coming through the AAU system and just, a really kind of a paradigm shift in how players are coming through just the ranks. And I just want to you watch a bunch of, tape on a regular basis. Do you think this is true? Do you think this is a cause for concern, like some other coaches are saying, just in terms of kind of the changing landscape of just NIL and just AAU and just kind of different alternatives? Like there's overtime, there's, more international, there's players seeking different avenues instead of just playing high school and going to college. Now kind of there's a lot of disruption in terms of how players end up going professional. Are these concerns warranted? Like, where are you seeing in terms of the fundamentals of the game?
I like teaching fundamentals, right? It's fun. It's like, oh, you don't know this? This is like the first time you're going to watch Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I get to experience this with you. If you take the tack, which we've seen other coaches in the NBA publicly talk about, of a frustration where they don't know this, and you're like, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you learn this in college? Why didn't you learn this in high school? You're going to turn the player off, and then good luck trying to teach them what you want to teach them, right? So that's one of the issues, I think, because, okay, what are they going to say? They're probably going to complain that they don't know how to move without the ball, right? That's probably one you hear about. Well, interestingly enough, I work with an AAU program in LA, and a ragtag group of kids. You never know who's going to show up each week to work with, or whatever. And I remember asking them, because it's like, I know when I was growing up, if I was in the wing and the ball was passed to the high post, I cut back door. Like that was, no one ever taught me that. We just did it. We knew it. It was intrinsic, whatever. I asked them, I said, okay, like it seems like we've lost some of these rules or whatever we used to know. And I said, what do you do if you're on the wing and the ball's thrown to the high post? And they all said back door. I got to cut back door. They know it, right? They might not do it, right? But they did somehow know it, which is surprising to me, but in a pleasant way. And so I don't know. I feel like, if a professional athlete has a deficit in some sort of skill, let's say it's moving up the ball, you should be able to teach that professional athlete, whatever that is, in 10 minutes. You know what I mean? If we're talking about how to move, in an action, in an offense, right? Specifically, whatever, it shouldn't take that long. You're upset that they don't know how to set a screen properly, right? That should take 10 minutes to teach how to set a screen properly. If they're a professional athlete, they should pick it up pretty darn quick. So I think a lot of this is overblown. It seems like in dealing with, I'm generation, what am I? Gen X. I'm Gen X. When you deal with the millennials, a lot of the time, they just don't know. Maybe you guys are millennials, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, like, my wife's a doctor. She's got a practice, and she hires nurses and whatever. And a lot of times, she's upset because they're not, like, quote unquote, like working hard enough. And what my response to her is like, you just got to tell them. And once you tell them, the money's like, oh, okay, great. And then they're great. They say they totally get it. But our generation tends to feel like, I don't need to tell anybody that. They should just already know that. And okay, if you want to take that track, then you're just going to be frustrated. What's the big deal? Tell them. They might not know it, and it's clear to them now, and then they'll do it. Generally, that's been my experience. But I know I've had that reaction too, where I'm like, they should know this already. This is professional. Okay, so what? They don't know that they need to work a little harder, or they need to stop asking that question, whatever it is. And from my take on it is that your generation is really receptive to that and probably needs it. And once you get it, then everything is great. So, I probably, I've had this evolution in my coaching style, my communication style over years, because I was raised with the other kind of coach, the Bobby Knight style. And, it took a long time to kind of reprogram all my initial reactions to get to there. But I got to tell you, it's a much nicer world to be in, right? When you are excited to show somebody something and you want to roll your sleeves up and teach them. And by the way, if we're talking about even lower levels and having buy-in and having that culture everyone always talks about, well, I know this is a left turn, but back in the day, it was I had to trust that the players would do what I'm telling them to do. Right, that was only a one-way street there, and that's dictated playing time and all of the relationship and everything. Well, the players need to trust that you want to help them get as good as they can be. And if you accept that as sort of a mutual meeting halfway, you'll get that buy-in that you're looking for. And if you're constantly saying, no, I'm not, you don't trust me. I'm only trusting you, and you have to do what I tell you to do. Well, then you're just going to be a frustrated coach for the rest of your career and never have that buy-in, or randomly on every other season have one, and maybe you'll have a successful season. But we're talking about building something that lasts, right? So you have to convince the players that you care about them, and there's no better way to do that than to roll up your sleeves, get out there one-on-one, after practice, before practice, and teach them in a constructive way certain things that you think that they would benefit from.
Coach, I also want to get your take on a recent blown call. We were talking about the Knicks, Matt's Houston Rockets. Just an egregious call, in my opinion. Was this just an anomaly with the refs, or do you see this with your tape watching studies? Is this a trend in terms of such an egregious call dismissed by these refs of the NBA?
Well, full disclosure, on Twitter, I end up doing a lot of defending of the referees, right? Explaining the rules, exactly how they process it, why they got to that result. They make the correct call 93% of the time, something crazy like that. They really are that good. That specific call, and by the way, the Knicks fans felt like they got screwed a lot. There was a Dylan Brooks drive. And I've had to defend that when the defender is not in legal guarding position, which is an anomalous term, but you got to kind of be square to the defender in their path, directly in their path, for contact to be legal, where it wouldn't be a foul on the defensive player. So I defended a few of these that have triggered people. Embiid did it once earlier this year, and then Patrick Beverley again, against Curry. And so, and I do my best. Most people are already so predisposed, they don't even want to hear it, but I try. Now, the Dylan Brooks drive, as an aside, there is a caveat in the rules for even if you're not in legal guarding position, if the offensive player veers in a overt way into the path of the defender, then that's an offensive foul. And they totally blew it on that one, that Dylan Brooks just lowered his shoulder and leveled Brunson out of the way. And so I know the Knicks fans were upset about that one too. And then, okay, the problem with the last call that gave the game to the Rockets was that, first of all, you shouldn't be that close to the shooter when you're closing out by Brunson. So that was a risk that, by the way, did you see how close the shot went going in?
Oh, yeah.
So it almost went in. So you got to give Brunson, he got it. You got to contest that, because he probably could make that, and then the game would be over anyway, right? Another one of those, the skills have evolved so much that making a 35-footer is nothing anymore. But so I get why he wanted to contest, and I liked how he did it. He glided by to the side. He was trying to get out of the way and not, touch him. The referee got stacked a little bit, where he was in line with as Brunson kind of passed between him and the offensive player. So he really couldn't quite see what he wanted to see. And when that happens, you probably just shouldn't blow the whistle then, right? Because you can't get it exactly. You're not positive, then don't blow it. Was there some contact down low after the release? Yes. Was it marginal? Yes. Did the lead official at the end of the game, after reviewing it, say it should not have been called? Yes. Now, are they protesting it? Will anything happen? Probably not, but maybe. I think they had one protest, right? Shaq a long time ago, and then Shaq was traded from the team when they had the replay of that part. So, it is tough. I really wish it didn't happen on that play where he got stacked and then made that call. I wish Tibbs still had his challenge. That would have been nice that he used before. All those things happen, and it really is unfortunate. And it was a bad call, and it does happen. They're human.
Coach, this has been a fantastic chat. Please let our audience know where they can find you on social media, where they can find your channel on YouTube, any other projects you're working on as well.
Sure. Well, YouTube is really the hub, and so b-ball. Just type in b-ball and it'll autofill because I've been doing it that long. And then b-ball breakdown obviously on Twitter is another big place. I'm gonna start doing some more TikToks. I have a new thing I want to do on TikTok where I'm gonna break down individual plays that people I think should like. But Twitter and YouTube b-ball breakdown, that's where you can find me. And I want to thank you guys for letting me talk your ears off today. I know I don't know. It must be in the air. I have a lot to say today. So thank you for letting me indulge.
Always enjoy it.
Of course. Yeah. Always love picking your brain, and we'll love to have you on again. Thank you very much, Coach.
I'm in.